Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we dig so deep we sometimes hit magma. Today, we're spelunking into the shiny, muddy world of rare earth elements, those magical minerals that make your smartphone smart, your EV move, and your government nervous. And guess who's sitting on most of them? Yep, our favorite supply chain overlord, China, the world's reigning champion in mining, refining, and reminding everyone else who's boss.
All right, so let's just jump right in. What is the link between your smartphone and a fighter jet? I know, it sounds a little bit like a riddle, right? But the answer, well, it's at the very heart of this huge global chess game that's playing out right now. Because believe it or not, the same stuff that makes your phone work is also absolutely essential for some of the most advanced military hardware on the planet. And that connection, that's why things are getting so incredibly tense.
So what are these things anyway? Rare earth elements. The name itself is kind of misleading, to be honest. We're talking about a group of 17 metals, and get this, they're not actually rare at all. They're pretty common in the Earth's crust. So what's the big deal? Well, the real problem, the bottleneck in all of this, is getting them out and refining them. It is an absolute nightmare. It's super difficult, incredibly messy, and takes a ton of nasty chemicals and energy. That's the real secret here, and it's a dirty one.
And once you start looking for them, you realize they are literally everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Think about the super strong little magnets that make electric motors in EVs and wind turbines possible. Yep, that's them. The hard drive in your computer? Them too. The fiber optic cables bringing you this video? You guessed it. And it doesn't stop there. We're talking medical imaging, missile guidance systems, jet engines. The list just goes on and on. Our modern world simply does not run without them. They're not just important, they're completely indispensable.
Okay, so that brings up the million-dollar question, right? How in the world did one country get a virtual monopoly on something so critical? Well, it's a classic story of strategic foresight on China's part and, let's be honest, some pretty big missteps by the West.
You know, it's crazy to think about, but it wasn't always this way. Far from it. Back in the day, from the 60s to the 80s, the United States was the top dog, the king of rare earths, all coming from the Mountain Pass mine in California. But then things started to shift. In the 90s, China started making these huge strategic investments. They were willing to do the dirty work for cheaper and with fewer environmental rules. The West basically outsourced the problem. And by 2002, Mountain Pass just couldn't compete anymore and shut down. Just like that, the door was left wide open, and China didn't just walk through, they stormed through.
And wow, this is what the result of that long game looks like today. I mean, just look at these numbers. They are absolutely staggering. We're not just talking about digging the stuff out of the ground, though they do about 80% of that. The real kicker is the refining, the hardest part. They control over 90% of it. And making the final product, like those super strong magnets, almost 95%. It's not just dominance, it's a complete top-to-bottom chokehold on the entire supply chain.
So what happens when you have that much control over something the whole world needs? Well, you don't just sit on it. You realize you're holding a weapon. And China figured out pretty quickly how to turn that economic control into some serious geopolitical coercion.
And listen, this wasn't some happy accident for them. This was the plan all along. Check out this quote from Deng Xiaoping from way back in 1987. The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. I mean, talk about calling your shot. This shows that the idea of using these minerals as strategic leverage, just like OPEC uses oil, has been baked into their strategy for decades. It's truly incredible foresight.
And this isn't just a theoretical threat. Oh no, they have absolutely used this weapon. Let's look at the playbook. Back in 2010, there was a maritime dispute with Japan. What happened? China quietly turned off the rare earth taps, and suddenly, Japan was forced to back down. Fast forward to 2019, the US blacklists Huawei. The very next thing you know, Xi Jinping is taking a very public, very televised tour of a rare earth facility. It was a threat, plain and simple. It was the geopolitical equivalent of saying, nice little tech industry you've got there, be a shame if something happened to it.
Now, their latest move is maybe the most clever and sinister of all. It's a new export licensing system. And get this, some in China call it the assassin's mace. It's designed to be a subtle, powerful weapon. Here's how it works. If you're a foreign company, you have to apply for a license. And to do that, you have to tell Beijing exactly who the buyer is, what you're going to use the materials for, and what the final product is. So, boom,
instant intelligence on your entire supply chain. But the real genius is that they don't even need a big dramatic embargo. They can just quietly delay your license. Or deny it. No big announcement, just chaos for your business.
And if you thought that was it, think again. It goes even deeper. China's not just controlling the materials themselves, they're hoarding the knowledge. They have flat out banned the export of their processing technology. And they're even restricting their best engineers from leaving the country so they can't share their expertise. They are building a fortress around this industry, not just with materials, but with human talent and technology too. Okay, so as you can probably guess, the rest of the world didn't just throw up its hands and say, well, that's that. Not at all. This huge looming threat has kicked off an absolute global scramble to find a way out of this mess. So what's in the world's toolbox to fight back? Well, it's a multi-pronged attack. First, you've got substitution. Companies like BMW and Renault are working on EV motors that don't need these magnets at all. Then there's recycling. Apple's partnering up to build facilities specifically to pull these valuable metals out of old phones. Third, stockpiling. Japan learned its lesson and built up huge reserves. They're even storing them in an old World War II bunker. And finally, there's reshoring. The US government is pouring money into firing up that old Mountain Pass mine again. It's an all-out effort.
What all of this really points to is a complete revolution in how we think about supply chains. For the last 30, 40 years, the mantra was just in time. It was all about maximum efficiency, minimum inventory, find the one cheapest supplier, and rely on them. That whole model is getting thrown out the window. The new way? It's all about resilience. It's about just in case. It means having backups, having stockpiles, and understanding that security is sometimes way more important than saving a few bucks.
But here's the thing. Even with this global scramble, the future is still really, really unstable. This has turned into a super high-stakes balancing act, and frankly, nobody's quite sure how it's going to play out. Now, to really get your head around this, you might be thinking we're talking about billions or even trillions of dollars. But look at this, $170 million. That's it. That's the total value of rare earths the U.S. imports from China each year. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's practically a rounding error. To put that in perspective, the U.S. spends more than 20 times that much on, wait for it, avocados. Yeah, avocados. But here's the crucial difference, right? Nobody is threatening to weaponize the global guacamole supply. This was never about the dollar amount. It has always been about the strategic value. And that brings us to a really interesting counter-argument. There are some folks, like Javier Blas over at Bloomberg, who think this whole panic is totally overblown. And their reasoning is basically Econ 101. The best cure for high prices is high prices. Think about it. If China really does cut off the supply, prices will go through the roof. And that just gives everyone else a massive financial incentive to innovate and find alternatives that much faster. Which really puts China in a tough spot. It's a classic double-edged sword, and this lays it out perfectly. If they use their weapon, sure, they can cause a lot of disruption for their rivals, but at the same time, they just push the rest of the world to find alternatives, and they speed up the end of their own dominance. But if they play nice and don't use it, well, they keep their market share, but they lose their biggest geopolitical bargaining chip. They're kind of stuck. So where are we now? Well, for the moment, things have calmed down. There's a sort of temporary truce, a recent deal that's paused the immediate crisis. But nobody is breathing a sigh of relief. It's been described as sketchy, temporary, and built on sand. Basically, it doesn't solve any of the real underlying problems. It just kicks the can down the road until the next inevitable flare-up.
So, here's where we land. China's chokehold is very real, but the world is waking up, and it's adapting fast. The big question we're left with isn't if China's dominance will end, because it probably will, but rather how much damage is going to be done before it does. Stick around, because our producer FireflyHaku, the rarest element of all, half genius, half caffeine, has polished this episode to atomic perfection. So tune in, subscribe, and maybe you'll finally understand why your phone battery costs more than your dignity.